They were saying that they were at the point where they couldn't take it anymore. And the people who were saying that are the people that James wrote this letter to. They were Jews. And remember last week we said that these people were Jews who were scattered. In fact, he said at the very beginning, the 12 tribes that were scattered, they were Jewish Christians that were scattered about into different parts of the Roman Empire. And they were scattered there because of persecution in Jerusalem. And you remember, we talked about the fact that Jews came to Jerusalem on the day of Pentecost, and they heard the good news about Christ, and they got baptized, and they were Christians. And they stayed there, but then hard times came. The Jews who were not Christians then began to attack the Jews who were Christians. And you got to realize the reason, though. As the church grew, it grew by Jews, the old-style Jews, leaving and becoming part of the body of Christ. The Jewish leaders were getting money from those folk. And they were mad because the new religion called Christianity was taking their money. I tell folk, you really want to find out what's going on, follow the money. You know, people think, well, Jesus was killed all because of all this religious stuff. Well, he was, but I'm going to tell you what the problem was. He was messing with that money. And so these Jews came across and became Christians. The church started growing, 3,000 and 5,000, but then persecution came. The old school, Orthodox, non-Christian Jews attacked the Jewish leaders. They killed James, they attacked them, and so these people scattered. Now, when they scattered, they went to these different cities, these different parts of the Roman Empire. And there were some Jews that were already there. Now, normally, when Jews came into a new town, Jews would look out for each other because they had no money, and they would look out for each other. They would help them with housing. For instance, you know, I grew up the next street over there here in Trinity Gardens. And when my father and mother first got married, and my father got a house over there. My mom used to talk about it. My older sister used to tell me about it. But the house, my sister said my mama told her that it was a shotgun house. Now, some young folk don't know what that is. Straight through. You can look in the front and shoot straight through the house, through the back. It had 2 rooms. Shotgun. 2 rooms. Now, by the time I was born, about 5 or 6 years later, it had about 3 rooms. Well, how did those rooms get there? Well, my father built the rooms. He added them onto the house. But he didn't do it by himself. Back then, the whole community would come and help you add rooms to the house. Like if you were doing the roofing, if a guy knew how to put shingles on, he'd help out. If you were doing the plumbing, the guy that knew how to put in, you know, the jack-leg plumber, he'd come over and help out. It might not have been the best, but you add water. Because when I was born and when I was young, they didn't have the inside toilet facilities. They had the outhouse. And everybody needed to move from the outhouse to the in-house. And so you would build and you would get the community to help and to add. So that's what these people did. These Jews would help other Jews who were moving in. And they would help them build. And you know, back then, every Jewish boy and girl, particularly boy, was taught a trade. So he was taught how to make something. Like Paul was a tent maker. Jesus was a carpenter. So you learned how to work. So these Jews that would come into the Roman Empire and they would be displaced, so they would make products. They would make things, and they would make the leather from animals for shoes. But here is what happened. When the Jews who were already there, the non-Christian Jews, when the Christian Jews first came, they welcomed them, and then they say, by the way, you know, we're Christians now. And they say, what? You're a traitor. You've abandoned the faith. You're apostate. You mean you've left the religion you grew up in to follow some religion based on some so-called Jewish prophet from the ghetto? We're not going to help you. And so these Christian Jews got no help from the non-Christian Jews. But then they got another dose from Gentiles. So the Gentiles didn't like none of the Jews, and they wouldn't help them because of race. So the old-style Jews wouldn't help the Christian Jews because of religion, and the Gentiles wouldn't help them because of race. Now, it was economic. So they wouldn't buy their products. They wouldn't hire them for a job. They wouldn't help them start a new business. And so these Jewish Christians were struggling. And they were wondering, did we make a mistake becoming a Christian? And James, one of the leaders of the church in Jerusalem, wrote this letter. Now, it's important that you understand that background because it helps explain some of the things that they were going through. For instance, in James chapter 1, it explains some of what James said. In James chapter 1 and verse 9, he said, believers in humble circumstances. He's talking to these Jews now. He said, ought to take pride in their high position. Now, earlier he said, count it all joy when you face this temptation. But he said, let me tell you something. If you are a believer and you're in humble circumstances, you know what he's talking about? You're poor. He said, let me tell you something. You are poor economically, but you can take pride in the fact that in the sight of God, you got a high position. He's saying, listen, here is what you can take pride in, that you may be poor economically, financially, but in the sight of God, you rich. In the sight of man, you poor. In the sight of God, you rich. What he's saying is, don't let your condition cause you to forget your position. Your condition is temporary. Your position is permanent. You might not have a lot of money right now, but inside of God, you're rich. If you've got grace, you're rich. If you save, you're rich. You may be broke now, but you got a daddy who owns the cattle of 1,000 hills. Don't let your condition distort your view of your position. In Revelation chapter 2 and verse 9, the church of Smyrna, John wrote to them. He said, I know you are poor. You say you poor. I know that because that was a poor church. He said, but let me tell you something. You rich. You got grace. You rich. You can talk to God, and God will move somebody in place to give you a job. You got that kind of power. You rich. You got a God that'll move heaven and earth to feed you. You rich. You know, some of us didn't realize we were poor growing up till we got grown. Now, let me tell you what I'm talking about. You got grown and people said, well, did you have this? Did you have that? Did you have this? Did you have that? You didn't have your own TV and you didn't have that. And you know what? No, you didn't have all that, but you didn't think you were poor because of what you did have. You had a mama who loved you. You had a roof over your head. You had a meal on the table. So you never knew you were considered poor because in the sight of God and to you, you had the things that really mattered. And so what James is going to say, hey guys, I know you're struggling with your money. I know you're struggling economically, but in the things that really matter to God, you rich. You got somebody that loves you. You got somebody who cares for you. You rich. And I want to tell folk here, don't let your condition mess up your thoughts on your position. Because your position is permanent. You are a child of God. You are a son of the Most High God. You are a daughter of royalty. You are a queen. You are sanctified, justified. You are God's precious jewel. Ain't nothing in your bank account gonna change that. When the prodigal son went and got in that pig pen, I mean, listen, when you eating hog food, hog slop, let me put it that way. Has anybody ever seen folks slop hogs in here? That's what he ate. That's the lowest that you can be. That was his condition. But you know what? He never lost his position. Because when he got back home, his daddy said, put a robe on his back. Not a robe, put the best robe on him. And the best robe was the Father's robe. Put a ring on his finger because he's letting him know you never lost your position. And so he's telling these people, he's saying, listen, things are tough for you. Now, what was happening, they were becoming impatient and saying, if being a Christian is going to cause this much trouble, why be a Christian? This is going on a long time. So they were becoming very impatient. And that's why he said in verse 4, let perseverance, which is patience, let patience finish its work. Listen, one of the signs, patience is a sign of maturity. My youngest grandson, Maxwell, you know, if you tell Maxwell you're going to do something, you better do it. So I told Maxwell, and I told him before, I said, Maxwell, we're going to McDonald's, you know, and he said, okay. Every 10 minutes, Maxwell, when we going? I pick him up from the daycare, when we going? And I keep having to tell him, wait. I tell him, wait. An hour later, he asked me again. When we going to Chuck E. Cheese? When we going to McDonald's? You said it. You said it. You said it. I say, Maxwell, wait. It's 9 o'clock at night. When we going to Chuck E. Cheese? Wait, Maxwell, it's dark. You said it. Because he's a child. He's 3 years old. And he's young, and he has no sense of processing time. But now when I get to the ones a little older, Nathan and Paige, they're 7, 8, 9 years old. I don't have to say wait as much because they have more of a sense of time and process. Okay? In fact, my brother-in-law, Roger, gave us 2 tickets to go to a Cougar game. Nice seats too, Brother Green. Good seats. And box seats. I mean, I can see good seats. And so I told Maxwell, I'm going to take you, because we had the 2 tickets, so I took Maxwell. And when I told Maxwell, that was about a week earlier. So the Sunday before, Maxwell. Now, Maxwell is older than, Nathan is older than Maxwell. Maxwell is about 3. Nathan is 7 or 8. Nathan was the one we're going to the game. He said, well, Papa, when we going to the game? And then he said, oh, we got to wait till Saturday. Because he's maturing. I rarely have to say wait to Naya or Breon because they're in middle and high school. Because they are more mature and they understand that you have to wait on the process. Now, as children of God, when we in bad situations, and God, you say, God, you say you're going to get me through this. God, you're going to say, I want it now, I want it now. God say, wait. It ain't going to happen now. Let patience do its work. You got to wait. It's not going to happen now. And listen, Moses got ahead of God and murdered a man. Abraham got ahead of God, too impatient, and got involved with Hagar. His 2 grandsons got into it. Their mothers got into it. And there's still some fighting going on today in the Middle East, partly because Abraham didn't wait. Peter didn't wait on Jesus, and he almost murdered a man. He cut the man's ear off. When you get ahead of God, bad things are going to happen. And he's telling these people, listen, and see, because they were impatient, then they were tempted. But patience is a sign of maturity. Something else, if you are patient, patience is a sign of security. It is. In other words, I can wait because I know I'm going to get what God got for me. So like if Carl, if Carl say got a rich uncle somewhere, and Carl say, my rich uncle going to leave me $5 million, and Brother Tim, I'm going to hook you up. And Carl, you're looking at me funny now. Work with me now. Carl say, who is that uncle? All right, work with me now. All right. And he say, it's going to be in 6 months. We're going to sell it all. Brother Daniel, I'm going to hook you up and hook the church up. Now, I'm not going to run to call every 2 weeks talking about where my money. I might, though. No, I'm saying where my money. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to wait because I'm secure that if Carl says he's going to do it, he's going to do it. All right? And if he comes back and says, well, we had some legal things, it's going to be another 6 months. I'm going to wait because I'm secure that he's going to do what he said. Now, I want to say all of us. If God said he's going to take care of you, it may take 6 months, it may take a year. You don't know how he's going to do it, who he's going to do it, and when he's going to do it with. But if God said it's going to happen, you secure in the fact it's going to happen. God takes care of his children. And part of maturity, that's why he continually used this term, being perfect, growing up, mature. It means waiting patiently. Waiting is a sign of maturity. It's a sign of security. I'm going to tell you something else about waiting and being patient. It gives you clarity. When you wait and give God time, you can more clearly see what God is doing. You say, okay, God, I get it now. Have you ever had God doing something in your life and you didn't understand what God is doing? It was unfair. It was confusing. And you say, but I'm going to wait on the Lord. I'm stressed, but I'm going to wait. I'm crying, but I'm going to wait. I'm struggling, but I'm going to wait. And then you say, God, I see it now. Anybody had one of those moments where you say, I see it, I see it, I see it? Turn to the person next to you and say, I see it, I see it, I see it, I see it. I was blind, but now I see. I see it. And when you wait, also, patience gives you serenity. That's peace. See, when you know God gonna do what he say, that God keeps his promises, you can sleep at night. The times in my life when I couldn't sleep at night is when I was impatient and I didn't think God was going to come through. But when you say, God, I know you ain't nobody like you, Jesus. Can't nobody do me like Jesus. I can go to bed at night because why am I trying to handle it when God is up all night taking care of all my stuff? He never sleeps. When you are impatient, and by the way, waiting does not mean you don't do anything. Now, I've told you before, going through the acrostic, you know, if you take wait, W-A-I-T, some people worry while they wait. They worry, their blood pressure goes up. Some people get angry while they wait. They're angry at the people that put them in that situation. And they feel abandoned and alone while they wait. Some people get involved with the devil while they wait. Because they say God ain't coming through. And some people turn from God while they wait. But what God wants you to do while you wait, number one, worship while you wait. Don't stop coming to church and worshiping God while you waiting. You get on up. I don't care if you got to catch the metro bus. I don't care if you got to hitch a ride. You come into the presence of God and worship him. Worship him with those bus passes till you get a ride. And you know what? I've learned this. Let me tell you something. I told you before, instead of criticizing God for what I don't have, I'm thanking God for what I do have. I may not be driving a $60,000 car, but I thank God for that hoopty that I got. They can laugh at me, it can whistle, and it can leak oil, but I'm rolling. Amen. I'm rolling. If you don't have a hoopty, thank God for the metro bus passes that you had. At the second funeral, we had a lot of metro bus drivers here. Thank God for those passes. And you know what? If I can't have that, I'm thanking God that I got feet to walk with. Because some people can't walk. And instead of complaining about what you don't have, thank God for what you do have while you wait and you worship him. Also, while you wait, affirm God's power. When Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were about to be thrown into the fiery furnace, I love what they say. They say, the God we serve, Paul, if you throw us in there, the God we serve can preserve us. We know God is able. Affirm affirm God's power while you wait. While you wait on that job, you got to say, I'm going to get a job. You got to speak positive things. You got to say, I'm going to get that house. I'm going to qualify. I'm healed. I'm hurting, but I'm going to speak what God say. His word is like a two-edged sword. I told you before, one edge is what God say. The other edge is when you say what God say. If God say it, I'm going to say what God say. You got to affirm God's power while you wait. God, you can change my wife. God, you can change my husband. You got to say that. And then while you wait, while you waiting on God to bless you, you invest in somebody else's life. While you waiting for God to bless your vision, why don't you bless somebody else's vision? Invest in somebody else. And then while you wait, testify and talk about what God has done for you in the past. Say, God, you delivered me in 1985. You delivered me from that bad relationship in 1992. Lord, you got me a job when I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills in 2014. And you can say, God, if you did it back then, you can do it right now. Anybody believe God can do it right now? And so while you wait, testify as to what God has done for you in the past. And so what happened was, when you are impatient, you are vulnerable to temptation. And if you look at the text of James chapter 1, James uses a word several times that's very interesting. Look at verse 12. Blessed is the one who perseveres under trial, because having stood the test. Verse 13, when tempted, no one should say, God is tempting me. For God cannot be tempted by evil. For God does not tempt anyone. See those words, test, tempt, temptation, trial. In the original language, remember the Bible was written originally in the Greek language. Those three words in English are the same word in the original word. Test, tempt, trial. There's another word called tribulation, which is a different word, and that word means to be hemmed in on all sides. Now, why does he use that word and it's translated differently? Because when you are tested, you are tempted. Let me give you for instance. You on your job, and there's a person on your job, they don't like you, and to be honest, you never like them either. And you get word from two people, not one, two, that they lied on you. I'm talking about a bad lie. And you didn't get it from one person, you got it from two. So you know it's true. Because you say she lied anyway, so you know it's true on your job. Now, that's the test. You are tempted to go down the hall, go in that person's office, you don't want to hear nothing they got to say because they're going to lie anyway, and blast them out. The temptation comes with the test. Your money is tight. I mean, you done tried everything, but your money is tight. So you're tested financially. So now you're tempted. Maybe to sell something hot. Y'all know what hot means. Y'all from the neighborhood. Y'all know what I'm talking about. Ain't exactly legitimate, all right? You are tempted to cheat on your income tax and claim somebody you know you shouldn't have claimed. You are, okay, getting quiet. You are tempted. See, with the test comes the temptation. You and your spouse get into it. He been acting funny. You ask him where he's been, and he's snapping at you. You wondering what's happening to the money, and you're not getting no answers, and he telling you, you ain't my mama. That's the test. He even slipped and called you ugly names. That's the test. You are tempted. Y'all getting quiet. You are tempted to make him hurt the way he's hurting you. Call him something ugly. Don't communicate with him. You're tempted to sometimes hurt the people that hurt us. See, what Satan does, what he does is to come at you. You know, like when you go to the doctor gives an examination. Well, he asks you about your health, and he'll ask you as part of the examination about your family history. What did your mama have? What did your daddy have? What did your sister have? What did your brother have? He's finding out what the tendencies are. What Satan, what he does, he looks at your spiritual history. He wants to know what has caused you to sin in the past, what your weakness is. So he wants to know. That's what Satan does. He looks at your history. If you've had some problems with money in the past, Satan looks at that. If you are a brother and you're married and you like a certain kind of woman that looks a certain way, you're attracted to one that she wears her hair a certain way. That's a certain color. You love that color. Why is it quiet? Okay, let me help you out. Okay. Satan knows what kind of woman you're attracted to. If you're a woman, Satan knows what kind of man you're attracted to. You know, if you just love a man who's bald headed. This is an example. Well, y'all gotta work with me, all right? Or you like a man that got wavy hair. Satan knows what your history is. Okay, now y'all quiet. Now, if I keep going with this, I can get to everybody's street now. All right? He knows it's hard for you to resist a glass of Boom Foam, a bottle of Boom Foam, or Jack Daniels, or Cavassier, or... And listen, that's what Satan does. He tracks he knows you're a person that if people say something about your child, you hold a grudge. They can say what they want about other stuff, but don't mess with your child. He knows that. And so what he does that examination, and he checks your spiritual history. And then what he does, he tries to do a separation, to separate you from your support system and people who will hold you accountable. You know, I love watching the videos about the animals, how the lions attack the wildebeest and the deers, and how I just like watching that. And the lions and the hyenas will attack them, and I just watch how they rip them open. I guess I need to go through therapy with that, but the lions attack, and let me tell you what they do. Lions, when there's a big herd of wildebeest or deer or a herd of buffalo, they don't just go in and get the ones that are in the middle of the pack. They look for the ones that are kind of separate from the pack. They look for the young. They look for the ones who strayed off, the ones who are not paying attention, the ones who are weak, the ones who may be sick. They look and they spy out, and that's what the devil does. And they try to, what they'll do, the hyenas and the lions will run. That's why the Bible says that the devil is like a roaring lion. He'll attack the herd, and then in the scattering and the confusion, he'll look for one that's separated. Yeah. That's why in this city, you got people that look for young ladies and young men that don't really have a family support. If you go look and you look at the ones that are on the street and the ones that are dancing at the strip clubs and the ones that are prostituting, nearly all of those young ladies and young men are somehow disconnected from family support. Because Satan says, if I can disconnect you from the people who will look out for you, it's easier for me to get you. You know, when we were building this building, it's made out of brick. We had the bricks that were piled up the guy would use, and people would steal the bricks. So we had security people out here to watch the bricks that were piled up. I spent one night out here, because I'm saying we pay for them bricks. You ain't gonna jack and steal our bricks. And people would get the bricks, because you can back up a truck, get you a bunch of bricks, and brick your whole mailbox. But we don't worry about that now, the people stealing bricks, because the bricks are not simply piled up together. The bricks are cemented with the other bricks around it. And to get one brick, you got to tear up this building. And so what we have to do, that's why at this church we have ministries and relationships, so that the devil knows that if he tries to get one of us, he got to deal with all of us. We have to be like that in the community. It used to be that when you grew up in the community, all your neighbors knew you, all the people who've been in the neighborhood knew who you were. They knew your mama, your daddy, and they were just like other parents in your community. It literally did take a village. But now you got people, and if you have a church where you got a bunch of people just piled in, it's easy for the devil to steal the bricks. And so the devil does an examination, then he does a separation, and then he does the temptation. Now, temptation, Paul said, turn with me if you will to 1 Corinthians. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, everybody, and Paul's going to say something about temptation. Watch what he says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 13. He says, no temptation has overtaken you except what is common to mankind. Temptation, testing, trials, it's common to everybody. I grew up, and I used to idolize people and think that, boy, that person is never tempted. That person is never tested. And he says it is common to mankind. That is men, women, children, teenagers. Everybody gets tested. And remember that word test and temptation, same word, but also the word trial. Listen, when you are tested, your faith is put on trial. Your commitment is put on trial. It is put on trial. And so everybody is tested. Our kids that are in school, they are tested by other kids at the school. Constantly they are tested. Do you want to skip class? Do you want to do this? I brought something from home. Do you want to do this? I brought a knife. They're constantly tested. Do you want to sneak into the restroom and do this? Do you want to do that? They are constantly tested. Teenagers are tested. On your job, you are tested. It is common. Number two, it is constant. Temptation, now, you may deal with it in different ways, but it is constant. You are constantly tempted and tested. The third thing is, temptation is controlled. Look what he says. No temptation has overtaken you but what is common to mankind, but God is faithful and he will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able to bear. Listen, God will never allow you to go through a trial that's more than you can bear. He will never allow you to be tempted in a way that you cannot resist. Nobody can say, I could not resist it. Yes, you can. Because God controls the trial. If you couldn't handle it, God wouldn't let it get to you. He stands between you and the temptation. And if you can't handle it, God wouldn't let it get to you. And I want you to remember that as you go through life, because all of us sometimes will be overwhelmed with things that's so overwhelming. You say, God, I cannot bear this. But what Paul is going to say here, God will give you what you need. So it is common, it is constant, it is controlled, and it can be conquered, because it says, and he will provide you a way out. And I want to tell you something. The way out is the way through. You got to go through it. Now, an example of that is the Jews when they left Egypt. Flip over with me, if you will, and just leave a couple of points with you on this. If you go to Exodus, if you will, chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12. And you know the story. The Jews came out of Egypt, and they got to the Red Sea. And we'll just skip over to actually chapter 14 to get to that part. It started over in chapter 12, but let's go to chapter 14, and just so you can see when they got to the Red Sea. In verse 10, when they got to the Red Sea, Pharaoh was behind them. The mountains were beside them, and the Red Sea was in front of them. And the Bible said, that this is in Exodus chapter 14, the Bible said they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord, and they told Moses, why didn't you leave us in Egypt? Verse 12, didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone? And then in verse 13, Moses said, don't be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord. And in verse 14, he said, the Lord will fight your battle for you. I just want to leave you with a couple of thoughts. Now, James knew this, and I think that he was using this to help them. A couple of things I want to say to you, that sometimes God has got to put us in tight places to get rid of old habits. If you are a person, or I have been a person that's a big spender, we spend money we don't have, buying stuff we don't need to impress people we don't like. If you've been spending money without budgeting or any thought, what God will do sometimes, he will sometimes put us in a tight space where we have nothing so that we can break that old habit. God will put us in tight, and by the way, it is not just money, it could be anything. God says, I want to put you in a tight space. Now, the problem with these people, their old habits were they were thinking like Egyptians. When they were in Egypt, they thought like Egyptians. They worshiped the golden calf that the Egyptians did. Remember, they had spent 400 years there. And God said, I got to break this habit that you have of depending on Pharaoh for everything, and this habit that you have of thinking like Egyptians. So I'm going to put you in a tight space to break an old habit. People sometimes run in the streets. I have been to the hospitals with young people who've been running the streets, and then they get shot and stabbed. And then they tell me, Brother Daniels, when I get out of here, I'm going to stay out of them streets, and I'm going to be in church every Sunday. And I generally will see them for about 2 Sundays. I want to say something to you. Be careful making promises to God you don't keep. Because what happened, if you don't learn that lesson, God will put you in a tighter space that you might not come out of. Number 2, being hemmed in on our sides will force us to look up. Listen, if the devil is on that side, and you hemmed in on that side, and you hemmed in on that side, remember, Pharaoh was behind them. The mountains were beside them. And when they went through the Red Sea, God had to part the water. So you had water on that side, and Pharaoh was behind them. When you are hemmed in on all sides, you are forced to look up. Sometimes we're looking around at what people said and what people are doing. Sometimes we look at our past, at what happened in the past. God said, don't look back, don't look around. You need to look up. Yeah. And when they were hemmed in all sides, they looked up. Let me tell you something else. God's delays are designed to get you where you need to be on time. Let me say that again. God's delays, see, they thought they were being delayed. But God's delays are designed to get you there on time. You think you got delayed? God said, that what you thought was a delay was actually designed to get you there at the right moment. Because earlier, Moses tried to get them there, but it was the wrong time. Moses wasn't ready, and the people were not ready. So God's delays are designed to get you there on time. Let me give you another point if you look at this. If you want God to get the glory, if you want God to get the glory, you must allow God to do the fighting. Sometimes we want to fight and give God the glory. Look, the Bible says in verse 14, the Lord will fight for you. There are some battles we need to stop trying to fight. Let God fight your battles for you. Now, you fought the battle and you got what you wanted, but it wasn't what God wanted. See, that's the problem when we fight. Step back and let God handle it. And then lastly, Red Seas open at God's command, not ours. You don't command the wind and the waves. God does. And you have to wait until God gives the command before it happens. You know, the book of James, when you go back, James is going to finally tell them something. He's saying, now you guys, these Jews, he's going to say, now, you guys are angry because your Jewish brothers won't give you what you want. They won't patronize your business. They won't hire you. You're angry because you're trying to get business from the Gentiles. Look what he tells them in verse 17 of James chapter 1. Every good and perfect gift comes from above. You're trying to get people to give you something that they are unable to give. You really want to be frustrated? Expect somebody to give you something they can't give you. You're asking somebody, you know, on the job. I was talking to a manager on the job, and she has people working for her who does not respect her abilities. In other words, these people are real technical. Because, you know, I work in IT, so you got these coders who are real technical, they're real smart, they can write this code. Whereas the manager, some of them doesn't respect her because they say she don't know what she's doing. So she's constantly trying to get them to respect her abilities. And she told me something. She said, you know what I've learned? I've given up trying to get them to respect my abilities. And the reason is, you can't get them to give you something they're unable to give. Because if folk don't respect themselves, they're not going to respect you. If a person doesn't love themselves, they cannot love you. Stop asking people to give you something only God can give you. That's what James is telling them. He's saying, guys, you're trying to get your economic well-being. You're trying to get your status from these old Jews. You're trying to get it. You're trying to get it from the Gentiles. They can't give it to you. He said in James 1, he says, your good gifts and your perfect gifts, it comes from God and not men. If you keep expecting people to do for you what only God can do for you, you're going to be totally disappointed and you're going to be broken because men are not God. That's what he's trying to tell them. And he said, and if you do that, you're going to be tempted to do some stuff you got no business doing. So he says, wait and let patience do its work. At the funeral yesterday, they had people from Metro. I talked to several people from Metro who had retired. And one of the guys who had retired told me that about 20 years ago, he was working for a company, an oil company, and they laid him off, got rid of it, and he was mad. So he said, I'm getting all my money out of here. He said he had a 401k. You know, that's the money that they save for retirement. He said, I told them, give me my money, give me everything I get, I'm gone. And he said one of the people in the benefits department told him, listen, don't do that. Don't do that. He said, you need to let that money stay there and just go on and wait and be patient. He said that was the best advice he could have gotten. Because now that money that was a few $1,000s is over $100,000. Because while he was patient, that money began to work for him. And it began to have compounded interest, and it was compounded. And while he was waiting, and he said he was able to retire because he patiently allowed that money to sit there and it worked. Listen, when you are patient, it works for you. And by the way, that includes relationships too. You know, when you're with someone, you know, we are spirit, soul, and body. And really, and then you have the spirit, the soul, the body, and then you have your intimacy and so forth. But don't you know that that must be a process where there's a commitment on all three levels? That must be a spiritual commitment. Both of y'all need to be Christians. How can you love another person if you don't love God? So both of you need to first be Christians. And then you must be friends. That's that commitment. Your soul, that's your personality, that's who you are. So you must commit at the friendship level. That's when you talk and have those long talks and talk about your future, and you talk and you spend time together and you want to be with each other. So you must have a spiritual commitment. You must have a friendship commitment. Commitment as friends, commitment there. And then somebody say, well, can I get to the physical commitment? Not yet. Then you got to have a legal commitment. You need to be married. Then you can go to the last one. So that must be a spiritual commitment. That must be an emotional commitment. You're friends. That must be a legal commitment. You're married. And then you can have the physical commitment. But what some people do, they'll pretend to commit at this level so that they can get the other person to commit at that level. And that's what you have to be careful of. But you have to wait on the process. Today, if you need prayer, if you are right in the middle of something and you need some prayer, you need to work through something, then God is able to take care of you. I hope everyone stays safe during the holidays. Who's cooking in here? Who's cooking? So I know whose house to go to. Give me a piece of turkey. Drumstick, that's what I want. Because y'all know I can eat some chicken and turkey now, all right? If it got a leg and a rib, I can eat it, amen. That's right. But if you are going through some stuff right now and you need prayer, we had two baptisms this morning, or you need to give your life to God, you can come as we stand right now. As we stand right now and sing the invitation song, as we stand right now.